Well, hello! Hi, I'm Kate Wyatt from Paella Puppets, and if you're watching this video, it's probably because you've bought a pattern from us, the Loopy Bird pattern. So we're really delighted to welcome you to the Paella Puppet family. Thank you for buying a pattern from us. So the first job you need to do is to download your Paella Puppets Loopy Bird pattern from the website if you haven't already done so. If you've got any problems with that, do email us and we'll send it to you. And you need to print out your pattern pieces on one-sided printing so that you can cut them all out ready to start making your puppet. So I have cut out the pieces and I've sorted out all the bits for foam, okay? So it's written on each pattern piece which bits you need for the foam. We're using 1/2 inch foam, and in your paella recipe for the Loopy Bird pattern it tells you how much foam you need in total. And I've used a permanent marker to draw around each piece. Now, because you're working with the foam, you don't really need to flip the pattern pieces, but you can. It's good practice to flip them because you're going to need to do it when it comes to the fleece. So it gets you in a good habit of flipping the pieces over. It's not really necessary for the foam. I've used a permanent marker, not too dark, but it doesn't really matter for the foam. And then I'm going to use some nice sharp scissors to cut the pieces out. A lot of puppet makers use a blade to do this, but I'm quite accident prone, so I prefer to stick with the scissors, and they're perfectly fine for 1/2 inch foam. Don't use your best dressmaking scissors though, because the foam will blunt them. Okay, so we have all our foam pieces cut out now. You may find, depending on how good you are at cutting, that you need to tidy up a little bit around some of the edges. So go ahead and do that. All of these spare bits of foam, don't throw them away. There's some nice big bits left over that you can use for other projects, or a lot of people use the foam like a brush for adding glue as well. So you can use them, cut them up in bits and use them for stuffing, all sorts of ways you can use those offcuts of foam, so don't waste them. But we're going to concentrate on making the head first. So I'm going to put all the other bits on one side for now, and we're going to have a little look at gluing the head together next. So we've got our head foam pieces cut out. Now just get your pattern for a minute and make sure you know which is your mouth and which are the darts. On this particular pattern piece, the mouth is much bigger than the darts, but it's not always, so just check you know what you're doing with your pattern piece. We use this contact adhesive for gluing together. It's pretty good stuff. And it stays fairly soft, so you don't end up with a solid seam where you've glued. Let me show you how to apply it. So I use lolly sticks. We're going to do the seams first. So using a lolly stick, I apply glue to both sides of the seam. And then you've got to let it cure for about 6 or 7 minutes. So normally I ask Alexa to time 6 or 7 minutes, and then I wait. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to make you wait 6 or 7 minutes while the glue dries. So at this point we'll pause the video and restart it when it's cured. So when your glue is cured for 6 or 7 minutes, you're going to take your pieces and push the two glued edges together and give them a good squeeze, and that contact adhesive should just hold them together without making too much mess. It should have practically dried by now. Okay, and with the other side. And then we're going to move on to glue the top edges and the chin. So I'm going to carry on and glue that. And then you need to wait again for the glue to cure for 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, so when your glue has cured, you're going to carefully make sure you get edge to edge, push it together, and then take the other end and push it together. This is to make sure you get absolutely straight match, and then go for the seam and push it together, and then go along the rest of the edge. Okay, and then the chin, and do the same, matching the two ends first, so you make sure you get a really good match. There we go. There's your Loopy Bird head. Okay, now if you find that you've got really big wrists or hands and that feels a little bit tight, you can cut away a little bit of foam here. It won't affect the pattern and it won't spoil the head. You could cut away up to about 1/2 inch to enlarge that opening there if you're finding that a little bit tight for you. So here's the head. So what we're going to do next is we're going to glue the foam on the beak while we've got the glue out, and I'll show you how to do that next. So here we are then, we've got the beak pieces, and again I've got my pattern pieces out to make sure I know which bits I'm gluing. So the bottom of the beak glues together like this, so along these two lines, along this pattern piece here, and the top glues along like this. So we're going to apply the glue again, and then we're going to leave it to cure. So when the glue has cured, we're going to put the top and the bottom pieces together. I've got glue all over my tablecloth now. Occupational hazard. So that's the bottom of the beak, and this is the top. Push it together quite firmly as you go along the glue line, so those two edges stick together really well. And there we are, that's the top and bottom of the beak, all done in foam. So now we're going to move on to gluing the legs. So you can see that we've got a cutout bit here in the middle. That's for the knee. It's going to wrap around like this, and then the knee will be able to bend. So again, we're going to glue down the sides and let the glue cure, and then glue them together. So you're just gluing down the straight sides, not the cutout bit for the legs, okay? And the other side too. Okay, so our glue should have cured now. So we're creating tubes with the legs. So we're taking it all the way around. It's a little bit fiddly. and then the top. And there we have a leg that will bend with a knee, and the other one the same. Two legs. We're going to make the rest of the Loopy Bird head now. We use fur for the top. You can use fleece if you'd prefer. That's up to you. The pattern pieces come in two separate parts because they're slightly larger than what we'll print onto a piece of A4 paper. So they have a little glue tab down the side. So you need to overlap and glue them in place to create your pattern piece. And then you're going to need fur if that's what you're going to do with us. Now think carefully about your fur because you want your fur going in a particular direction. So that's going that way. Can you see how the fur's running naturally in that direction? So from the top of the head down on the Loopy Bird, that's the direction I would prefer for our Loopy Bird pattern. So we're going to make sure that the neck is at the bottom. Okay, so we're going to glue the pattern piece, put it in place. Now when you're cutting fur, cut it one piece at a time, don't double up and cut it. And don't go straight in and cut through the hairs of the fur. You want a fine pair of scissors and you want to tuck it along as near to the fabric, so you're just cutting the fabric and not the hairs of the fur. Otherwise it doesn't look quite right when you pull it away. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm just going to glue the pattern pieces together. Okay, so you can see that I've cut the pattern piece to just outside of the solid line rather than the dotted line because I'm going to hand stitch this fur in place. I prefer to do that, I find it easier. If you're going to machine stitch it, then you'll need to leave the seam allowance in place. And I'm going to use a very sharp pair of small scissors so that I can tuck this scissor blade just underneath the fabric and try not to cut through the hair of the fur at the same time. And when I pull it away, I want it to do that so that I haven't cut the hairs. Can you see? So when you're placing the second head, remember to flip it over and also to position it with the fur going in the right direction, so the neck needs to be at the bottom. Okay, so it's got to be flipped, otherwise your two pieces aren't going to fit together correctly. So there's your two head pieces already. All these little offcuts of fur though, don't throw them away, save them. You might be able to use those for eyebrows or moustaches or whatever. So keep them all in a nice little goodie bag, for you might want them for another occasion. So these are going to be popped together and hand stitched, seams first, and then around the top and around the chin. In the same way that we glued the foam head together, these are now going to be stitched together in the same order. So you can see here that I have now stitched the darts in the head on both sides, and I've put the two right sides together ready to hand sew along the top edge and the chin, and that's what I'm going to do now. When you're working with fur, you have to keep tucking the edges, the hairs in as you work along. I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm going to speed it up slightly, but I'm going to leave the camera rolling so that you can see what I'm doing as I sew along this particular seam. So there we are, we've stitched along the edges, and now we can turn it the right way out. There we go, and the fur should be going downwards, and hopefully we've managed to avoid catching too much of the fur in the seams. You will have little loose bits of fur like this along the cut with the bits that have been cut, don't worry about that. Now I'm going to bring in our foam head, and we're going to pop it inside. Exciting. Okay, so we're going to line up the seams again. So the sewn seam with the glue seam at the chin and over the top of the head. You're going to waggle it about a bit until you get everything lined up. Start to see the shape of the head. Okay, so we're now moving on to the mouth and the mouth plates. So these are the hard parts inside the mouth, where your fingers are going to go above. And people use all sorts of different things for these in puppet making. You can use plastic from ice cream tubs and things like that. They tend to be quite flexible. But you can put several layers together and use contact adhesive to hold them together. We tend to use either MDF, 3mm MDF, or I'm going to try balsa wood because I bought some for another project and I've got some left over. So I'm using the pattern and I'm going to draw around it. Pencil, whatever. Ooh, permanent marker bleeds on balsa wood. Pencil probably would have been better. Okay, it doesn't matter that I haven't got that quite right, because when I'm using my Stanley knife it will come straight. Okay, so I'm now going to cut those out with my Stanley knife, being very careful. When you've got the edges cut out, then sand around the edges to make them nice and smooth and so that you don't get any splinters. So using the same pattern pieces, I'm going to cut two pieces from this latex rubbery sheet. Exactly what it's called, if you want to order the same as us, is on the recipe with the pattern. You can use felt and do this stitching. What I'm going to use it for is to create a non-slip surface for your hand to go on, and I'm also going to sew a strip of this good secure belt, whatever it is, to act as a barrier for your fingers so that you've got good control of the mouth. Okay, so first, this has got a peel off backing, so it's self-adhesive as well, which is just brilliant. So here we are with all of our bits in place. And I'm going to give myself a straight edge and cut a little bit wider. If you've got larger fingers, you might want to give yourself a bit of an arch across the where your fingers go underneath. But I've only got small fingers, so I'm hardly going to give it much at all. So there are various ways of making hand plates for your puppet's mouth. So have a little look on YouTube and the internet, but I'm going to show the way that we make them for our puppets. So here I am with my pieces cut out. I'm going to stitch this, it's like a belt. I bought it like this on a roll. I bought five of them like this. We'll put the measurements and the description in the paella recipe for this puppet, but I'm going to stitch it to here, just up from the end like this. Now, sewing with a puppet, hand sewing. Some of the bits for this pattern are best done by hand sewing. I always try and use upholstery thread if at all possible, because it's lovely and strong, it's not going to snap, and it gives extra strength to the seams. So that's what I'm using here, and I'm going to stitch. The end here does tend to fray a little bit when you cut it, so I'm coming in and I'm going right through, and I'm going to stitch along here. Now, of course, you could do this on the sewing machine. It's going to gum up my needle because this is self-adhesive on the back, so therefore there's glue on it. So keep a needle for this job. You won't want to use it for anything else afterwards. And I'm going to stitch along and then back again. Now at this point, this is the lower plate, so this is where the thumb is going to go. So decide, do you need to create a bit of a bridge or not? So I found that they come quite loose, so I'm hardly going to create any bridge at all on this. And then I'm going to peel off the back. Very, very sticky. And stick it to the wooden mouth plate, like that. Now with these little offcuts that I end up with, instead of wasting them, we tend to just put an extra little bit over here, because this is where your thumb's going to come in and out, in and out. Don't worry about it peeling back a bit, because when we glue the mouth onto the fleece, it will have contact adhesive along these edges, and that will help to keep it down. But that little bit of extra there just stops that lifting up Okay, so that's worth putting a little bit extra there, and that's going to be nice and firm for my thumb. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And there we are. That is your mouth plate. Now, on the inside here, there's going to be felt on the inside of the puppet's mouth. Now, you may wonder, why haven't we gone right to the end? Where's the foam beak? Here we go. And the reason for that is because we want the end of the beak to hang over and make a lovely little shape like that. If this mouth plate went right to the end, it would straighten out the beak. We wanted a nice little curve at the end, so that's why the end is cut over. So they're going to sit inside the beak like that. Okay, on to the next thing. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to attach the mouth plates to the mouth foam pieces. So we're going to be working with the contact adhesive again. So let's open it up. You remember that you need to leave it to cure. We're going to put it on. So it needs to be only so far down each of the edges. And we'll leave it to cure for 6 or 7 minutes. And as well as both edges, it'll need to go onto the wooden part of the mouth plate, or plastic if that's what you're using. So it goes down along the side edge as well. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let's get the right one. Okay, and any that's left, pop it along the edge, because you want that to be nicely secured and glued, and then let it cure for 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, so that's the glue cured on the mouth parts. So what we're going to do now is to put the wooden piece just alongside the foam. I'll get my glasses on, and then we push it over so that the glue that was on the edge of the foam is now making contact with the glue that is on the wooden mouth plate. And we position that so that we can do the same on the other side. Push it along. If you've allowed it to cure enough, it will just bond really lovely and neatly. If it's pulling away, it's just because it's not quite cured enough. So come back to it and try again, and keep pushing it in place until it sticks nice and strong. And that's the top one. And then we're going to do the same. I've got glue all over the tablecloth. Going to do the same to the bottom one. Okay, so it's called contact adhesive, so you need to make contact between both parts that have had glue on them. So you're pushing that edge right over to make contact with the glue on the wood or the MDF or whatever you've chosen to make your mouth plate out of. That's it. We'll give it a good firm push until that is a really good firm bond between the two. If it comes apart, just keep going back, just means a little bit longer. And there you are, top and bottom. of your bird's beak. So now we're going to do the fabric pieces to go on top of the foam for the beak construction. So I'm working with the fleece first. I've cut out the pattern pieces. Now you'll notice that on our pattern pieces there's a solid line and there's a dotted line. The two different lines are dependent on whether you're going to be hand stitching or machine stitching. If you're hand stitching, cut out on the solid line, because you're going to bring the two edges together. You don't need so much seam allowance. If you're machine stitching, cut to the dotted line, and then you will have enough allowance for the machine stitching. Right, the other thing to think about is, here's my fleece. I've got it doubled right side together. And I want to think, which is the stretchiest bit? Fleece stretches one way and not so much the other way. So when you're using your pattern pieces, you think, where does the stretch need to be? Well, the stretch needs to be over the top and the bottom of the beak. It doesn't need to be front to back. It needs to be over side to side. So that's how I'm positioning my pattern pieces. I'm pinning them in place. I'm not going right to the edge because it's got like a funny little bit at the edge I don't want on my beak. So, and then I'm going to cut them out. So you can cut this out in a single layer or in a double layer like me. If you're cutting out in a single layer, do remember to flip your pattern piece so that you have a mirror image of one piece. So one piece one way, flip it over, cut it the other way. So the words are upside down here. That's because of the way that it's been placed on the pattern page. But you can see that this is the top of your beak. And you are going to stitch from this edge here to the tip there. Okay, so you're going to be stitching along this top line here. Okay, choose a colour cotton that matches the fleece if you've got it. And on the base of the beak, and you see that's how the beak's going to go, you're stitching this line here. So with your right sides together, from the tip of the beak to that point there, and you're sewing either by hand if you've cut the smaller size out, or on your sewing machine along this line here. So this is the inside of the mouth. So this is going to be in felt. This is what we use, and some people use a stretchy velvet. It's up to you. So I'm going to go for pink on the inside, and these are the pattern pieces all ready to cut out. I'm going to do this on the machine, so I'm allowing a bit more of an allowance. I'm going to cut it slightly bigger than the pattern piece. And there we are. Okay. So hopefully you can see now that I've stitched along the line between the two pins. And the next job is to pin the mouth, the top of the mouth, to the inside of the mouth. So this is the upper mouth inside pattern. And we need to find the center point. Okay, and we're going to pin that in place. Now when you're doing something that's a bit fiddly, rather than put your pins in sideways, if you put them in to the point to the seam like that, you actually, if you slow down as you go over it with your sewing machine, you can you go over it without having to remove your pin, which can be very helpful. The rest of them I'm going to put in as I go along. Okay, so you can see that I've pinned these in place ready for sewing on the machine, and we're going to do the same allowance. If you were doing this by hand, of course, I would be doing an overstitch around the edge and your pieces will be slightly smaller. But I'm going to do it on the machine because it is always gives you a lovely, neater and stronger finish if you can manage to do it on the machine, but hand stitching is fine. So I'm going to take these away and do that now, and I'll show you what they look like when I come back.